My name is Jennifer Mellis. I'm an Assistant Deputy Minister with the Ministry of Infrastructure, and I'll be moderating today's session regarding the Infrastructure Projects Act, particularly on the consultation with the criteria around provincially significant projects. Today, I just want to start by acknowledging the territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, on the territory of which I reside and work. And ask that you reflect on the territories on which you reside as well. I'd want to start by thanking UBCM for hosting this event today, and for all the coordination that has happened behind the scenes. Really appreciate the team effort to make this happen for us today. A couple of things I wanted to start off with is we will be walking through some housekeeping. So Claudia DeHaan Hewitt will be walking us through logistically how the day is going to go, or this event's going to go. And then we have Minister Bowen Ma, as well as Honorable Brittany Anderson, the Minister of State for Local Governments and Rural Communities. We're going to provide some opening remarks. So I will hand it over to you, Claudia, and then we'll get going with the opening remarks. One thing I did want to recognize, I did want to acknowledge that we do have the president of UBCM with us today, Corey Ramsey. I welcome you and thank you for joining us.
Great. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Before we get started here, I want to go over some housekeeping items with everyone. So note that this webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording and presentation slides will be shared with everyone that's registered for the event via an email after this session. You might have noticed that we have disabled the chat functionality for this webinar, and we encourage everyone to use the Q&A function to ask their questions. Note that we will encourage you to post your questions throughout the event, but we won't get to the questions until the Q&A portion of this session, which will be at the end. The Q&A function and icon can be found in the top menu next to the chat icon. So feel free to start using that. And if you wish to ask your question live, please know that this is that you can use the raise your hand functionality as well as using the Q&A for this. So if you wish to ask your question live, I will be able to enable your camera and mic. And if you want to just post in the Q&A section that you wish to ask your question live, then that's a prompt for us to kind of unmute you, and we can bring you on live as well in that time. So just a reminder, questions should be clear and concise. Of course, they need to be respectful, and we're happy to answer all the questions as hopefully we get to them all at the end of this session. And I'd say that concludes my part of the housekeeping portion of the webinar, and I would like to hand it over to Minister Anderson right now.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to welcome everyone and say thank you to UBCM for hosting, and a huge shout out to the new president, Corey Ramsey. I'm looking at the list of folks who are on here today, and so many great friends and incredible representatives. So thank you so much for taking time. I know your time is extremely valuable, so I just want to thank all of the participants. I am coming to you today from the legislature on the Lekwungen speaking people's territory, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nation. And I also want to thank the Minister of Infrastructure, her entire team, for working on this and for being able to provide this information webinar so that we can do a better job in terms of our engagement, hearing directly from you, and sharing that information out. So really grateful for everyone who has worked hard to make this call happen. And I hope it is a really useful, valuable, and helpful meeting today. All right, over to you.
Thanks so much, Brittany, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bowen Ma, BC's Minister of Infrastructure. Grateful for the opportunity to join you in this webinar to say a few words from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations here in Victoria as well. I'm really grateful to my colleague, the Honorable Brittany Anderson, Minister of State for Local Government and Rural Communities, for her consistent leadership in bringing the province and local governments together. Also joining us are staff from the Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs, Jessica Brooks, Kara Woodward, and Marie-Kay Edmondson, as well as staff from my ministry, the Ministry of Infrastructure. You already met Assistant Deputy Minister Jennifer Mellis. We are also joined by Executive Director Jody Dong. I also have to say, I'm very excited for the renewed leadership approach being brought forward by Corey Ramsey, President of UBCM, and I'm pleased that our staff teams are now working together on how we can work with local governments to design the regulations and policies that are required to implement the Infrastructure Projects Act. Over the summer, we've also been engaging with First Nations and interest holders, such as environmental groups in the construction sector. And a critical component of this engagement today is to understand from you the opportunities that you see to leverage the Infrastructure Projects Act to expedite approvals for projects that are important to your communities. My Deputy Minister, Bobby Pleckus, attended the UBCM convention on my behalf and met with many of you. And I understand that in those meetings, many of you emphasized the important projects that are needed in your communities. And we're very interested in how the Infrastructure Projects Act can help you get those projects built faster as well. You may be aware that a similar webinar has already been held with local government staff. I understand about 60 local government staff participated, and the bulk of the questions were focused on projects that are important to local governments and how they can benefit from designation under the Infrastructure Projects Act. So this session today is about your turn to hear more about the Infrastructure Projects Act, to understand how the proposed criteria for provincially significant projects might work, and for us to have be able to clarify any questions or concerns that you have. I think a really important part of this is to re-emphasize what the Infrastructure Projects Act is and what it isn't, what it does and what it doesn't do. It can be a very useful tool, but it is not a magical tool. It is not a magical act. So I'm very interested in learning how we can collaborate to get those projects that are important to you built more quickly. And I will pass it over to Jody Dong, Executive Director responsible for policy and legislation, to walk through a brief presentation. And then she and Jennifer will lead response to Q&A. Thanks so much, Jody. Go ahead.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time. We do have a few slides that we can go through to help provide context, and look forward to hearing your questions and comments and thoughts. We did have a really great session with your staff a couple of weeks ago. We got some great feedback, and I understand that's posted on the UBCM website. So if you're super interested, that information is available there as well. I also wanted to thank my team who are supporting on the call today, and Intergovernmental Relations Secretariat team, as well as the UBCM team with Claudia, Glenn Brown, and Brent Felkler, who we've been working with to bring this to you today. So just in introduction, the webinar purpose is to focus on our first regulation that we're creating under the Infrastructure Projects Act, and that is the criteria for the designation of a provincially significant project. So in order to do that, I will provide some background on the Infrastructure Projects Act and what we're trying to do, as Minister said, and not do with this legislation, and then go into the different categories of projects that are under the Act, and then go into the criteria and what we're proposing, and that's where we'd really like to hear from you on, and then the next steps. Next slide, please. So why did we do this legislation, and what is it? Next slide. So it's really an opportunity to support community growth faster. And so really the purpose is to address delays that can happen, that we have all experienced, I'm sure, in doing infrastructure projects. And they can happen at the federal, provincial, local level. And that's really around approval processes and permitting requirements. So this legislation and the tools and pathways that are provided by it are really focused on permitting. It is not a tool or mechanism for funding, unfortunately. It is laser focused on getting to those permit reviews faster and more efficiently. As we know, delays can mean missed opportunities and huge delays in costs for projects, eventually making them kind of untenable because the cost has grown so much. So we're really trying to address that. And what it is building on other provincial initiatives to provide community infrastructure. We know there's been a lot done in the housing area. And so this is really about providing that complementary community infrastructure, focusing on schools, hospitals, healthcare facilities, post-secondary. It's really what our ministry is about. And then also bigger picture, the provincially significant projects. And particularly for those provincially significant projects, this is part of broader permitting reviews that are going on across government. You may have seen around the natural resource sector, the statutory permitting reform initiative that's been brought forward, as well as Heritage Conservation Act. And so what we're trying to do across the board is get to those reviews faster. So just to provide some context about where we've been and where we're going. So the blue slides are the ones, the sort of regulatory ones where we've had approvals and they've been, they're going through or have gone through the system. So as you'll recall, at the end of May, Bill 15 was passed and is now the Infrastructure Projects Act. We did have an elected officials webinar, which some of you would have attended in the spring with Minister. And then throughout the summer, we've been doing engagement on our regulations, and that includes the one today on provincially significant criteria. And so you'll see that we are here, the yellow donut there. The provincially significant regulation, we're planning to bring forward as soon as we can when the consultation and analysis is complete. And then we will bring forward what we're calling the Division 2 and 3 policy pathways. Those are the local government tools that I'll talk about in more detail in a little bit. And we have other regulations coming up that haven't been launched yet in terms of the engagement. One is for an expedited environmental assessment office, and we're partnering with, the expedited environmental assessment regulation that we're partnering with the environmental assessment office on. And you'll see that will be launched in the coming couple of months. And we are also do have one open on our website for qualified professional framework, which we're hoping to develop and bring into play with provincial permits sometime in the next few months as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, under the Infrastructure Projects Act, we do have two categories of projects. We have category 1, which are projects led by Ministry of Infrastructure. So those could be, those will be under our purview, which I'll go into a bit, or broader provincial capital projects. Those are led by other ministries. And then category 2 are the provincially significant projects, which I'll get into. Slide, please. So category 1, these are provincially funded and delivered. We have definitely an emphasis on the ones that the Ministry of Infrastructure is leading. And so those are delivered by school districts, universities, colleges, health authorities. They can be delivered by those partners or potentially others, but also can include other ministries. So for example, Ministry of Transportation and Transit. So there's a bridge that could be considered a category 1 project or other kind of transportation infrastructure, or something that's led, funded, and delivered by another ministry or ministry partner. Those are not, the criteria that we're talking about today do not apply to this category. This category, because they are provincially funded, it's much more straightforward. And the designation criteria is not something that we're going out on a broad engagement with. Slide, please. Category 2, so these are the ones that we're talking about today. These are important to the whole province, and they can be led by one or more of these agencies. So it could be Crown Corporation, such as BC Hydro, local governments, such as yourselves, First Nations, or private entities, or a combination of these. So the key difference is that for category 1, they're wholly provincially funded, and for these ones, they can be a combination of these or can be led by, funded by one of them. Slide. And the pathways that can be created and can apply to either category 1 or 2 projects are under these buckets. So we've got 3 buckets. So as I said, the purpose of this legislation is really about permitting and getting to those reviews of permits faster. So it could be provincial permits or local government ones. And for the provincial ones, the pathways or tools that we have are prioritization of those provincial permits. So if we have a project that is designated category 1 or 2, it can be eligible for any of these tools. So prioritize provincial permit review. So say, for example, there's a school that's, it's not a great example, but potentially like a school or project in your community that needs a provincial permit. It can, if it's designated under this legislation, it can jump to the front of the line for those permit reviews. As we know, the queues are quite long and can take quite a long time. So if it is designated, it can jump to the front. And then another one for provincial permits are qualified professionals. So that's the framework we're building where a qualified professional can review and make a decision on a permit in lieu of a statutory decision maker making that decision. And that's the purpose of that is to free up time for statutory decision makers to work on kind of the bigger, more complex ones. And so for qualified professionals, we're looking at the kind of less complex decisions that we can assign to those folks. And so there is more information on our Engage website, Engage BC website, and we do have a survey and a primer on that website if you're interested in qualified professionals. We'd love to hear from you. Then the second bucket are environmental assessments. And so we are working with the Environmental Assessment Office. They will be building a framework for an expedited environmental assessment that will only be available to projects designated under this legislation. And they'll be launching that sometime in the next couple of months. And there's another tool there where there can be an automatic issuance of a provincial permit once an environmental certificate is awarded. And that's to avoid some duplication that happens when a company proponent goes through an environmental assessment and then they get that certificate and then they have to go back and apply for permits, and it's often quite repetitive. So it's to eliminate that duplication. And then local government reviews. So local governments can request that the province temporarily postpone provincial land use planning requirements. So this is, an example would be around zoning and official community plans. And so if there is a project proposed to be built and the area, a school, for example, again, is not zoned for that, then the local government can request that the rezoning be delayed until there's a routine update of the official community plan rather than going through it at that time. And that will allow the school to move through the review and approvals process more quickly. The second tool for local governments is an agreement seeking process between a project proponent or the province and local governments to break through decision-making barriers. So if there is a permit that is waiting for approval from a local government, and there's a delay or there's an issue with kind of getting through that decision-making process, then if the project is designated, there can be a process set up for including a facilitator or whatnot to work through that and address that constraint. It could be very open. It could be a number of things, but we've put a process in to be able to work through that constraint. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's kind of an overview. I know that's a lot of information, and we're happy to talk about that, address questions that you might have. The focus really of this particular webinar is to talk about what is a provincially significant project. In order for a project to be designated as provincially significant or category 2, it must meet these 4 buckets or circles of requirements. And again, these are proposed, and so happy to hear from you if these don't work for you or that you see something missing. So I'll go through each of these individually, but what they are broadly is must meet a certain project type. It must have First Nations decision makers designation support, meaning designation under this act. Must meet core requirements and then also additional benefits. If it meets all of those requirements, then it is considered eligible for a provincially significant project designation. It doesn't mean it will automatically get that designation, but it can then be proposed to government to decide whether or not that is a provincially significant project, and also which of those pathways or tools we could assign to help it move through the process. So I'll go through each one of those and what those mean more specifically. So for the project type, you'll see the list here. These are broad. It's obviously very broad. It's intentionally broad. However, it is important that the project make some progress towards meeting some of these provincially significant goals that the province has. So around food and water supply, critical minerals and mining, human health and safety, energy security, public infrastructure, affordable housing, climate goals, environmental restoration, post-disaster recovery, and supply chain capacity. As you'll see as we go on, that the criteria kind of gets narrower and narrower in terms of what could get through. So this is the kind of first goalpost. Next slide, please. The second one is First Nations decision maker support. So if the project designation does not have support from the significantly and directly impacted First Nations, it will not be eligible to be a Category 2 project under this legislation. We do want to be clear, though, that the support is that the process that we'll be building out to get that support is only for the designation of the project, not for the project as a whole. So the province must continue to meet its duty to consult requirements under Section 35. None of that changes, but there will be also a requirement to have approval from the First Nations on the designation of the project. And we've been working really closely with a lot of nations and First Nations organizations on how we break that down and obtain that consent, how they can confirm that and what it means over the summer. And we're making some good progress on that. Next slide, please. So the third circle are core requirements. These are very important. So the project must meet all of these. So first of all, project readiness. The project must have funding in place, understanding that sometimes funding does come later, but there must be a really good solid plan. So it's really not meant for kind of projects that are in the very, very early stages of planning and may or may not happen. And proponents are looking for this designation in order to make the project happen. That's not the point of this legislation and the tools. The point is the process is that the project has already been approved, is sort of underway, and there's some issues going on with the permitting, and so it's meant to designate them and then address those specific issues. So the project must be ready, and it must have what we're calling a path to success, which is a feasibility study done, a business case, partners in place. The second one is that it must benefit from the tools that one or more of those 6 tools that we have under this legislation. So the proponents need to demonstrate why the project is not moving forward and which tools in the Act can be used to address those issues. And then the third one is that they must meet a financial cost threshold for the capital of $100 million, or that the project must provide significant public benefits. We have so far heard that the 100 million is not a feasible number for a lot of projects that are led by local governments. So we're looking at that and would love to hear from you today on how we might make that work better, or that the project provides significant public benefits, how we might make that work for you and what you see as important to be in that category. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. So this is the fourth circle. And so the project must achieve one or more of the additional benefits. These are very similar to the project types, but it's just another layer to make sure that they're meeting one or more of these important government objectives around diversifying trade, access to new markets, supply chain security, replacing U.S. imports, improving community livability, or achieving labor goals. And that next slide is our last slide. So this is our website where we have this information. We also have an email that you can send any feedback you'd like to have. We'd love to hear from you, and we do monitor that all the time. So that is the end of the slides, though, and we're happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Jody. So as was described before, you can either type in questions into the Q&A or raise your hand, and we will we'll start taking a queue of folks.
We have a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Great.
Jody, the first one is a question about whether this is further diluting local government powers like Bill 44, which I believe is a housing bill. So I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Does somebody from the HMA want to weigh in on this? Just because we don't know the ins and outs of that bill.
I'm certainly happy to speak to Bill 44. I think the question is maybe a little bit around the relationship of the infrastructure bill to the concerns noted, but I think, we, in general, the kind of the work around Bill 44 has been in supporting the ability to build more houses and communities faster, and certainly there are zoning considerations that have come into effect there. We continue to work with local governments to understand how that implementation is going, and if there's feedback that's coming through that process, we're very happy to receive that. So certainly, Councillor, if there are concerns or questions about Bill 44, happy to kind of receive those directly as well. I would maybe defer to infrastructure on the question regarding Bill 15.
Jennifer, do you want me to take a go?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Sure. So this is about addressing specific viable projects that have demonstrated demonstrable public benefit. So we'll be looking to work with local governments on how to really move forward on challenges that you might have in getting to reviews or approvals of projects, and not necessarily that there has to be an approval. It's really about getting to how can we address the whatever delay is, if there is a delay being holding up a review of a project. What is that? How can we identify that, and can we assist you in moving through that? And we're doing the same on the provincial side as well, and just recognizing that this is not about a lot of this is about the province's permitting processes, and so we just want to be able to look at all levels and do what we can to address delays.
Okay, there's a couple questions, Jody, about First Nations support requirements. So there's two different ones here, but I'll maybe just lump them together. We can speak to them. So this one I think was from the Regional District of Central Kootenay, and it says, will First Nation support requirement towards designation apply within municipalities or just in rural areas? And then another question was around how a local government would determine which First Nations to seek designation from, based on the fact that the consultative database has a wide range depending on the location.
In terms of the first one, we are developing that criteria right now on how to determine which ones are significantly and directly impacted. We are working across government to do that. So to make sure that with all of the initiatives going on across government with other ministries right now, we want to make sure that we're consistent. So we are working with them, and we're also working with First Nations organizations and nations individually. I'm sorry, I can't give you an answer today, but there will be an answer coming. We're just not quite there yet. So that's the first question. The second one, I'm sorry, I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, I think
question.
the second one, maybe I'll chime in here, Jody, and I think
Yeah.
like as Jody's mentioned, we're still working through this, but we're not expecting local governments to do that outreach to obtain support for a designation. That's something that the ministry or the province would be taking on. So if a project was seeking designation support, in our process of identifying that a project would be considered to be provincially significant, that's something that we would take on from the province's perspective. So that doesn't mean that if you were a proponent, you wouldn't have to do your duty to consult, but from the component of the criteria that we're proposing, that would be a provincial responsibility. So hopefully that helps there.
We would obviously work with whoever, like if this is a municipal example that you're thinking about, we would work with you and within the parameters of your relationship with that nation. It wouldn't be something that we would kind of come in and circumvent something, for example. It's meant to be something that we do together, but certainly, as Brittany was saying, the responsibility to ensure that the support from those nations, that criteria objective is met is on us.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions in the Q&A and one hand up. So I think I'll go with the first one here in the Q&A, and then we'll pop over to Danielle, who has her hand up. So here's a question that says, would this process require the ALC to expedite review/decisions?
The answer to that is no. This doesn't apply to the Agricultural Land Commission.
And then Danielle has her hand up. I think she was next in the queue there. So Claudia, if you don't mind unmuting Danielle so she can ask her question and turn her camera on if she'd like. Go ahead, Danielle.
All right, thank you. Hi there, my name is Danielle Veach. I'm the mayor of the village of Pooskoopi. Going through this bill, a few concerns that have definitely popped up for me are anything regarding talking about energy services in the resource sector. We have recently seen, so my community is in northern British Columbia, for those who do not know, we live beyond Prince George. And we've recently seen an influx of permits regarding wind farms within our region. And part of the province has even become lax on the environmental regulatory permitting requirements and isn't even like providing data regarding the cumulative impacts to the regions or the communities that could be potentially affected. So with that, while they have been in communication with local First Nations throughout the region regarding these wind projects, and they are getting support, there's a lack of transparency and communication amongst the communities that are going to be most impacted by these large infrastructure projects around wind and solar energy. So you're talking about pushing forward bills and sort of expediting that permitting process. How do you plan on maintaining that communication between the communities and maintaining that level of transparency, which frankly up north, many of our communities and residents already feel is extremely lax, and that there's not enough transparency as it is. I just don't understand how a government plans on expediting the permitting process, which is already going quite slow and already has transparency and communication issues with communities. You're going to do that and then be able to maintain a level of transparency and communication that you're already not meeting at the current time frame.
I can start with that. It's an excellent question, Danielle, and you're right. There's a lot happening in the space right now, I hear the frustration. I understand what you may be going through. Not living in that area myself, but we do see a lot of more activity. What we're proposing is more, particularly around provincial permitting, is front of the line. So it doesn't change the permitting process the way it is now. And I know that there are issues with the permitting process and the lack of transparency and communication. We're working very closely with those permitting agencies. The BC Energy Regulator is one of them now, especially with the wind projects. That's part of the Bill 14 work that happened over the same time as our bill came in. So often there's a lot of conflation between what our bill does and what theirs does. And then work that's happening within some of those permitting agencies to help address some of those issues that you're talking about, because we're not changing the process. We still have to go through the regular permitting process and work and consult with the relevant partners, acquire approvals where necessary. We just get to go to the top of the pile. There's significant backlogs in the provincial permitting system that are well known and well articulated. Maybe not well articulated in some areas of the province, but are well known to us, and we're working on it. But that's going to take time. So what we're talking about is any projects that are designated as provincially significant or Category 1 projects can just go to the front of the line, but that process that's already in place is maintained. So I know that doesn't probably bring you much comfort. Just know that it's a well-known issue and that there are broader groups in government that are trying to tackle some of the things that you've really clearly articulated.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next question in the queue here is, what are the criteria for deciding if a First Nation is significantly and directly impacted so that they're designated as a First Nation decision maker, especially in relation to significant?
I think that's similar to the one I spoke to earlier. We are developing that criteria right now with nations and with other ministries, and we are not ready to. We haven't finalized it yet, so we can't tell you today exactly what that will be, but can assure you it's coming. We just want to make sure we're consistent across government, and also that nations that their feedback is being incorporated into that. So we'll be back. We'll bring that back for sure.
And the next question is on asking province to delay land use planning requirements. Will the local public input on rezoning be impacted or delayed in any way?
Jody, do you want me to?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
happy
Thank
to.
you, Jessica.
It's a good question. I think my understanding of these kinds of circumstances, so rezoning in the context of the Bill 15 provisions, will really depend on the project and the different kinds of opportunities that a local government and the province identify as part of that process. And so consideration of rezoning and associated processes, I would expect to be part of that conversation, but it would be project dependent. And Jody, please correct me if I've misspoken in any way there.
No, yeah, that's correct. That's my understanding too, Jessica.
Okay, the next question is from Blair, Ireland. Is there any appeal process for a local government when we perceive that the project will harm the community? The Okanagan watershed is one of the most important economic drivers in the Okanagan, and damage that will hurt the local economy. There's at least one project right now taking place that's harmful to the water supply, but has been signed off by a QP, and other QPs do not support.
That's a really good question. We have not built in an appeal process for tools that are assigned under the legislation. However, there will be consultation process that happens during, particularly with local governments, during the designation process, and that would be part of the decision making. We also have an ability to add terms and conditions to any designation, and so that could be, that part of it could be used to address concerns such as what you're raising here. We're also working on how to address cumulative effects in this whole process. And there is a lot of work going on, again, across government about the cumulative effects framework and how we can make sure that while we are helping to get to decisions faster on projects, we are definitely still taking into account cumulative effects and that they're influencing the decisions there. And we know that for QPs who are looking at cumulative effects, that they're part of the work that's going on is to improve that process as well, and as part of the framework that's under review. So I hope that answers your question, but it is a really good one, and it's one that we're working on.
Maybe we can take Blair off of mute.
Sure.
He offered to speak to this verbally, and maybe just give him a chance to respond.
Yeah, no, it's if I'm off mute now,
You are.
okay, great. Yeah, it's a concern. You know, here in the Okanagan, we rely on our watershed that drives all the economy. The economy is ag, it's tourism, it's building homes because we're a great place to live. It's not resource extraction. It's not even timber extraction. The timber extraction is limited because our forests really don't have a lot of valuable timber. So that's what we're concerned about. You know, I'm also the chair of the Okanagan Basin Water Board, so it's not just about my community, it's about the whole Okanagan community and the watershed and how we have a chance to protect that. And if there is truly a consultation piece, because we have not heard about that, you know, that's why I asked about an appeal process, because we're the people that are going to care most about what happens to our community going forward. And we're going to have to wear those problems forever.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to be able to have a say. And, you know, this project that I'm talking about isn't happening directly in my community. It's happening in a community to the north. But on the surface of it, you would say that this is maybe a significant project. But actually, there's one person signed off on it, and every other person that's consulted about this says this is the wrong thing to do. It's going to pollute an important water source for this community. And the community has been trying to fight back in so many ways, and there's no help for them.
Mm.
So because what the province's response to all of it is, and health is involved in this, is that QP has signed off on it, so it's all good. And what doesn't matter what all the other QPs say. And,
Yeah.
you know, they've consulted 13 to 14 other ones, and all of them agree. So there's no ability to, it doesn't seem at this point to solve that problem. And we don't want to see these things, you know, like the ability to build schools and do the infrastructure that we need to do. That's great. But we're concerned about what this other thing is. And if we don't have an ability to appeal or have, you know, if we're involved in the consultation process, that's great. But we want to be taken seriously.
It's an excellent point. This is another area where government's really grappling with how to move forward. There is an initiative that's underway under the Waterland and Natural Resource Ministry, Walrus, we call it.
Yeah.
Very
familiar.
Yeah, they're doing the cumulative effects framework, and we're trying to unpack. So instead of making decisions on a project by project basis, you look at the region, and particularly with something like the watershed that you're talking about, is how are we making decisions around that? So this cumulative effects is a layer that I think, right now QPs don't necessarily have to answer into that framework or those like from a regional perspective, but the province is moving into that. There is engagement underway around how we can start to talk about assessments by region. So we can put the link in the chat as well if you wanted to learn some more information. But I'm happy to take your particular issue back to that ministry and work with that ADM directly, because it is, I hear this concern and I know the area quite well. And it is something that we need to think about.
I just appreciate you listening. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, the next question is from Keith Page. When an infrastructure upgrade in a legacy municipal facility triggers cascading regulatory requirements across multiple sectors like energy, seismic, fire, accessibility, how are municipalities supported in obtaining sign-off to close out projects rather than being forced into open-ended systemic upgrades and repeated revalidation of otherwise stable structures?
I'm wondering if anyone from HMA has anything to speak to with this one.
I'm afraid I don't know enough about kind of the municipal infrastructure, like the detailed infrastructure processes. But I wonder a bit if this links back in a broader way, Jody, to the question of what constitutes a provincially significant project and the potential for whether or not these kinds of municipal or local government infrastructure projects would generally be considered in scope. I think, if they are, then these kinds of considerations are valid, and I think something that, the province would want to think about as part of that process. But my question, I guess, is whether or not we expect that they would be captured.
Mhm. Yes, I don't imagine that this would be a kind of project that is designated as provincially significant, but I guess we'd have to really kind of properly answer it, we'd have to talk about the specifics of the project and whether it would be potentially designated under this legislation. But just from what you've provided there, I think it might be a different kind of issue.
Let's offer Keith the chance to speak to that too.
Sure. Yeah.
If you'd like.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yes.
Thanks.
Well, the example I provided is probably more in that 10 million to 99 million pocket. I also think about the tailings infrastructure that we have, the diking infrastructure, the legacy infrastructure priorities for local government, and many of it is touching older legacy projects. The one I'm referencing is a rec facility that's 86 years old and has federal and provincial funding going into it now to refurbish it from an energy standpoint. And those are significant from a rural context, even though they may not be in the $100 million category. And that's where the infrastructure repurposing of community really needs to have its attention. So what is there in the act when thinking about that scope to help bring legacy structures into renewal without necessarily triggering having to upgrade everything connected to that infrastructure? And that can be closing out landfills, that can be tailings, that can be dikes, that can be recreation facilities. And maybe if this facility is in Surrey, it would be $100 million facility, but it's in Nelson, so it's a $15 million facility. But that's the premise of the question.
Something we are definitely looking into the cost threshold of, so it's as it is now, it's 100 million or significant public infrastructure, and so we're working on that second piece and what that means to be able to support communities and be able to capture as much as we can, as is feasible, to be able to speed up the reviews of these types of projects. So I'm not sure if that kind of gets to what you're asking. But
I think that is about bringing it forward to contemplate in the scope of what
Okay.
you've just brought up, in how do we support local government improving upon facilities, knowing that the taxpayers we can't just go to them all the time. They simply vote people out. So how do we move projects forward without necessarily opening up a can of worms every single time we touch something, which is then creating these massive asset management nightmares in front of local government. And we need support maybe at the provincial level sometimes at looking at individual cases and saying, hey, is there another way this can be closed off because you improved the roof over here or because you changed the diking system over there? It is better. We do that in liquid waste management, of course, like putting in place long-term planning to institute iteratively over years, but we don't have an equivalence when it comes to the massive infrastructure liabilities that sit inside of our structures. I'm thinking of Nelson Hydro now, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I understand. That's a challenge. I'm not sure. I think we can definitely take that into account when thinking about how to define that significant public infrastructure and the challenges that you have in scoping what a project is. And maybe we can follow up more with you. That's good feedback
Yeah,
for us
it
to think
is.
about.
Okay, so moving on to the next questions from Corey Ramsey. She said, thank you, ministers, for the webinar. I'm wondering what is the ministry's expectations with regards to the number of projects that could be considered provincially significant? How does the ministry plan on managing expectations around the number of projects being considered? And then as a follow-up, in terms of speeding up approvals and permitting, who identifies the constraint? Is this the ministry or the proponent? And is there information that can be shared on how this is going to be managed when a constraint arises?
Do you want me to take that, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm just reading it. It's hard to take this in real time. Thank you, President Ramsey. I do, the expectations around the number of projects, it really depends, to be quite honest. When we were developing the legislation, this wasn't contemplated that we would have, it wouldn't be a lot. It would be a handful. I think we even used that in a lot of our communications materials that we sent out, a handful of projects that would be designated as provincially significant. That's why one of the reasons the thresholds are the way that they're set the way they are is to really kind of hone in on the things that we really want to move more quickly on. And the things that are truly of provincial significance. So we don't necessarily have a framework for how, the number of projects. I think it is really dependent on, what the problems are, that we're facing with the projects that come to us. But until the framework's in place, until the designation criteria is in place, and we start looking at the kinds of projects that are coming through to us, I don't have a clear answer for that. But just so you know, if the thinking was around really truly only using provincially significant projects in a limited way. So I'm not sure that helps. Did you want to take this second question, Jody? And maybe we can also take President Ramsey off of mute and camera. But did you want to respond to the second question?
Sure, around managing expectations. Yeah, so the criteria is going to be, I think we're building it. That's why we've got the 4 buckets. It is going to be challenging for a project. Like we're trying to not be able to capture everything under this designation. Otherwise, not everything can be provincially significant. So we will be having, some guidelines about what this is, and we'll come back with our actual regulation when it's drafted and complete. We can come back again and talk about what it might look like before it is taken forward and approved. But we will have to be managing expectations that it can't be every project. But the significant public infrastructure part of that, in that definition, we're working on what that looks like, and I think that will be a big part of managing expectations.
Thank you. President Ramsey, did you have a follow-up?
Oh, yeah, I just thank you for that. I think that's been a question we've all had is, how many projects are going to be considered under this new bill. I guess really the question that I think we're hearing from local governments is, what is considered a constraint our bylaws and, our official community plans, are those going to be considered constraints? We've finally, after 2 years in Prince George, just this last week, finalized our official community plan. It took 2 years to get that across the finish line. We're very, very pleased about the work that went into it. But, is that going to be a constraint in some significantly provincially significant projects? So just looking for clarity on, if a constraint arises, is that determined by the ministry, by the proponent, and what, will local governments, long-term planning be considered in that process? So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is something we've been discussing a lot, and kind of trying to work around what is or figure out what is a constraint exactly and what is not. That's something that we're working on now, particularly in the work with UBCM staff, and talking about that, what might look like. So the way that a project would come to the attention of government, of the ministry, either HMA or Ministry of Infrastructure, is that there would be an acknowledged issue that there is a constraint. So it's not it definitely wouldn't be a financial constraint. So this is not for proponents to sort of want to try to get out of paying fees or anything like that. It's more of a constraint regarding a time delay that is really affecting the viableness of a project, or impacting its ability to move forward. So we do need to figure out how to explain that. We'd love to hear from you on that as well, about what it should or shouldn't be. That's what we're working out now, but that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Thank you so much for that. I'm happy to continue the conversation with our staff and the ministry on really getting some solid information around that. So thanks.
Maybe President Ramsey, I'll just include that the intention is to work together to understand what the constraint is, and to not, go into the three-step process without there being awareness. Of there having conversations, of having, being talking through our constraint and what the possibilities could be around that. So yes, we want to create more definition, absolutely, but also I do want people not to walk away thinking that this is something that's going to be done to you, without having those conversations. And I think there was a lot of fear around that as the bill was released, and understandably so. So just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you so much. I think that's going to be music to my members' ears. So much gratitude. Thank you for the webinar. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining today. Appreciate it.
Okay, so the next question from Jessica Stanley. Can you please talk about how community interests enshrined in OCPs are valued in comparison to economic interests deemed of provincial value?
This is a great question. These are tough. I need to process them and just because they're very deep and really good questions. This one, I think, so for a project to be designated, it has to be significant public infrastructure. And so I think part of the definition of public infrastructure, and we do talk about community infrastructure as well, is that is identified in an OCP through community leaders, and that's something that is important to the community. It's not, as Jennifer said, we're not looking at this is the provincially significant project, we're going to kind of shove it down your throat. It's something that we're looking at, we want to do with you. And in terms of the economic interest, for it to be designated, it needs to not just be an economic project. It needs to meet all these criteria that we have of, it has to have First Nations decision maker support. It has to meet one of those project types, which are really the types of projects that are beyond simple economic projects, but that they all do have they help meet government's objectives around climate or energy security or these public benefit ones. So I think ideally it's a combination of provincial public benefits, but also community ones. So we're not looking to kind of overlay a strictly economic project on a community, as Jennifer says, and do it to you. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, so the next question is from Sue Cairns. Could you speak to the full scope of what could be included in provincially significant projects? For example, is there a possibility that high impact projects such as mining or oil and gas could be included and possibly considered for expedited EA? The concern is cumulative effects, including impacts to community, environment, and long-term water security.
So maybe I'll start by saying that the Premier, in the announcement to the introduction of this bill in the House, explicitly said that it won't be used for oil and gas projects. I'm not sure if that's going to change based on some of the feedback we've heard, because there has been push from other parties that disagree, that think that oil and gas should be considered as part of the eligible projects for designation. But we'll see what happens as we move the criteria, the regulation through, and as we pull together the analysis of all that we've heard. Then mining is a potential. So it would have to meet obviously the criteria that we do end up finalizing, and would be the considerations for expedited EA are going to follow procedurally. From the conversations we've had with the EAO now, very closely to the procedures that happen now. So it's looking at truncating timelines, but not necessarily the process that's involved in an EA. I understand the concern around cumulative effects, and we are going to put, if we haven't already, a link to that cumulative effects initiative that's being run through the natural resource sector. The natural resource ministries here in the province. But I absolutely hear you on that, Sue. And I think there's equal concern on our side to make sure that the tools that we use do not have that do not impact those procedural those safeguards, maybe I'll say, around that are already built into our processes that we have now. But this is a good follow-up for us to come back with once we do have the regulation drafted, and all the considerations that we've heard across the province are folded into something that we can share with you and continue this conversation.
Jennifer, I do want to add to that there will be an engagement for the design of the expedited environmental EA process. We definitely are very, very alert to and sensitive to how we're going to incorporate cumulative effects assessments into all of this, and really don't want, we'll absolutely not be skipping those requirements. And so the idea with that expedited EA process is that there are just parts of it where the timelines are shortened, but we're not skipping any of the environmental standards or processes that are involved in that. So I just wanted to assure you, hopefully that's reassuring.
And Danielle Veach has her hand up again. We want to go to Danielle, and then we'll continue with the Q&A.
Thank you. Just one more question. As we're sort of talking about within this bill that you're wanting this to be projects where you're working with the local governments and not sort of forcing hands or pushing something upon them. And in a perfect world, that's what everybody wants. We all want to be working cohesively. But I guess my question is that is there going to be a mechanism within this bill that gives municipalities the voice to appeal projects in the interest of the local communities and residents that could be potentially affected?
Do you mean on the project as a whole?
Well, when it's, you know, a lot of things that we are seeing up north, there's lots of work amongst, you know, the province and First Nations authorities and the resource sector. There's lots of land use planning things coming out, and that is affecting local governments that are in these land use planning areas that are being identified. And so, you know, there are permits and projects that are being established within those. And so while this is fantastic that you're wanting to work with local governments, if there ever were to come a time where a project is being proposed and, you know, meets the requirement for being a category 1 or category 2, that could affect local farmers that are part of the regional districts or communities that are within the impact area. Is there a mechanism within this bill that could allow municipalities to appeal on behalf of the general public within their communities?
We don't have
So-
yeah. Sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the same thing. We don't
Okay.
have that built into our bill. But I think what I want to say here is that a lot of these projects that would be considered for use of our tools would be late stage projects where those proponents, and particularly for the on the category 2, the provincially significant projects, the major projects, there is requirements around public consultation, and so none of that changes. Those projects would still have to adhere to that, and particularly follow the EA procedures that are in place that have dispute resolution mechanisms, that have, you know, built-in what was the word you used? It wasn't dispute resolution.
Mechanism? Sure.
Yeah, mechanisms to be able to sorry, it's not audit. You did say a word that I just can't remember.
Appeal.
Appeal, thank you. An appeal process. So I think the reason why we're struggling with this is because the tools are limited. There's only 6 of them, and almost all of them are when the projects are sort of in the late stages where, you know, the provincial permits are already ready to be moving forward. We're not talking about conceptual projects for the most part. These are things that a region or local governments would know, especially if they're near you, close to you, would be involved in, hopefully, and you'd be definitely aware of it, and the public would be aware of it. So we're not driving the projects themselves. We're not providing financial support. There's no there's no investment decisions that the province is involved in that are linked to our bill itself. It's only on those discrete 6 tools. So it's hard for us to answer that because we don't necessarily have a role in the public consultation processes, but the province would have to adhere to its regular permitting processes for sure.
I think if I may add, is that okay?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I just I know a perfect example of this, well, not really a perfect example, but an example of this, you know, last summer, the province worked with local First Nations authorities and different other parties within the region regarding the caribou project that took place just outside of Chetwynd, British Columbia here. And there was a huge miscommunication between the municipality and the local government, the province and the public. And it ended up creating a ton of problems, not only for the local community, but for the local First Nations community as well, because there was really no public consultation, and the province just announced that they were, you know, taking a large portion of the outer recreational area surrounding the community to take part in this the caribou project that they had set up. And so like that's one of those examples where it's like that went all the way through all those processes and there wasn't enough consultation with the public. And then by the time the local government and the municipality found out what was all encompassed within this work, it was complete. And so there was a lot of then sudden backtracking, and the public was was really upset. The First Nations were, also feeling it too. The public's reaching out to, them, and it creates that domino effect of not being transparent and not having that proper public consultation. And so that's where my question about mechanisms to appeal come in, because sometimes these things, there's so much communication going on in the background, that transparency bit does get missed, and we have seen it up north. I don't know if this is an issue that happens in other places, but it is definitely something that we've seen up in the northern region more than once.
I really like this conversation because it does highlight for us that even if we don't have those mechanisms in place, the communication around the use of our tools is going to be important. So we can't fix all the problems you just described. It's a big government. There's lots of and I think these things happen quite often, and it's unfortunate, Daniel. I really sympathize with it, particularly in that example. But the thing that we need to take on, because there's so much misunderstanding about the use of our bill and the use of provincially significant and what it is and what it isn't, is to be able to communicate more broadly. So I think we're going to work that into the processes, not necessarily in the regulation itself, but in how we implement the use of these tools and how we engage with local government and the public on how we implement it. So we're going to take that on, and I am sorry we can't fix all of those government problems. Wish we had a magic wand for that, but it is something that we can take to heart in terms of our role in not adding to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we'll head back into the Q&A discussion here. There's a question from Dana. You spoke about enabled tools in the Act that First Nations would have access to rather than not actually having approval for a project. What are those tools? Might be a simple question and answer, but we have 6 bands that we have to get support from, and our council would like to know working towards MOUs with these bands.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can speak to that. What I was referring to there was that there are the consultation requirements that for with First Nations around project when there's a project being proposed, and so those obligations for consultation remain unchanged. What I was talking about in terms of designating a project as provincially significant is that we are also requiring First Nations decision maker support for the designation of that project to open up those pathways to move forward. And so that's what I was just trying to distinguish. So if a First Nation, I think what you're asking, if a First Nation doesn't actually approve or support a project, it's pretty unlikely they're going to provide support for the designation of a tool or a pathway. So I think that answers your question. But essentially there's two, we're just trying to distinguish between the two processes, and that the ongoing requirements for the Crown's duty to consult is not changed or impacted by this legislation. That still remains.
And maybe I'll just add, Jody, it looks like just from Dana's question, that it sounded perhaps in the presentation like we're giving First Nations access to these tools, but it really we're asking them whether they support the use of the tools or powers or pathways in the Act.
Yes. We're trying to figure out how to talk about that. That's not super confusing, because it is always. And so we're just trying to emphasize that we're not reducing the Crown's duty to consult on any projects, and that there will be part of the criteria for here is that we have support for designation of the project.
Okay, the next question is from Rob Gay. Access to affordable high-speed internet is critical in rural and remote BC. The province's permitting table has worked well. Thank you. Does this act provide the province any authority over private sector companies whose infrastructure, such as TELUS poles, support local projects?
I would, the big answer here is that we are contemplating private projects. They would have to meet the criteria. Because the example there might be too small to be deemed as provincially significant. I don't know enough about teleschools. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe it's massive business in BC. I don't know. But I think it wouldn't meet the thresholds for this example. But yes, private sector companies, we are talking about, major projects that aren't, obviously public infrastructure. We do consider them kind of, part of like in the broader term of infrastructure. And in the act, we do call them infrastructure projects. But I can see how that could be confusing.
Yes, so they would still need to be, we've talked to BC Hydro. BC Hydro projects could be potentially eligible if they meet, the bottom line is they still have to meet all of the criteria that we're talking about. If you're just wondering if you're asking if we can direct private sector companies to support provincially significant projects, no, we cannot do that. That's your question.
Yeah.
This is really about permitting. And we are working with BC Hydro. We have heard that BC Hydro permits are lengthy delays. They can be. And so we're working with them on how to make sure that they're aligned in any projects designated under this act, and that they're doing what they can to kind of support the goals with the project.
Okay, the next question is from Mark Parker. And I'm just taking a look at it now. It might be more in relation to Bill 14, but I'll just read it out and let's see. Once the process gets to BCER, local government needs assurances that they will be given the opportunity to comment on the community impacts or review any proposed impact mitigation strategies associated with wind farm or other renewable projects as part of the BCER permitting process.
Yeah, that is the other bill that went through the House at the same time as ours. So I don't even remember the name of that bill. And I always just call it
Renewable Projects Streamlining Act, I believe.
Streamlining Act. Thank you. And we will provide that comment to them. I know that they're out doing consultation on their regulations right now. So I think if you had the opportunity, Mark, and you wanted to provide some feedback, I'm sure they would take that directly. But we will at the follow-up, we'll make sure that they hear it from us too.
It looks like Mark has his hand up, so maybe we'll just unmute him and let him speak to that.
Sounds great.
Go ahead if you can, Mark.
You may have to unmute. We still can't hear you if you're trying to get through to us. Oh, his hand's down. Why don't we take another question and see if we can get Mark back on?
Sounds good. Okay, the next question is from William Gerald Leibel, and he's a councillor from the District of Kitimat. Can the provincial government prioritize infrastructure investment in communities that successfully attract social housing projects through BC Housing? I'm referring to infrastructure downstream from these projects, sewage, water supply, natural gas infrastructure, not between the housing project and the street.
Yeah, I think if that type of infrastructure meets the criteria, then absolutely it can be designated. I think if you're talking about kind of funding, because you talked about prioritizing infrastructure investment in communities, that's not in the scope of what we're talking about. Well, we can definitely take that back. I know that is definitely an issue. We can pass that along to the infrastructure folks.
Okay, and the next question is from, oh, sorry, I see Mark's got his hand up again, so maybe we'll see if Mark can unmute this time. Go ahead, Mark.
Technology is great when it works. Sorry, Mark, we can't hear you if you are.
It looks like you're muted. Mark, maybe if you try to unmute. From our end, it looks like you're muted. I know sometimes my mute gets stuck.
Why don't we take William's second question?
Yeah, good call. A lot of proposed projects and existing structures require remediation for substances like heating oil and asbestos. These costs are so prohibitive that developers cancel their projects. Kitimat has a number of these structures which have been standing vacant for years with health and safety risks. Can the provincial government look at partnering with local governments to fund remediation?
Yes, that's again something we can pass along. We can't help it with this project, but I know contaminated sites are a huge, very costly and a real problem to move forward with projects. So we can provide that feedback to those who work in that area as a concern that we've heard.
And the next question is from Amy Watson. She's curious how this act intersects with the EDMA requirement for local governments to conduct risk assessments, including Crown land. She's aware we can choose where we do them. However, big projects such as mines, forestry can increase community risks. I would like to suggest that risk assessments be the responsibility of the tenure holder building these projects.
Okay, I don't know anything specifically about that area, but I think that's something we can take away.
We'll definitely take that back. Yeah, we'll investigate that more. Thanks, Amy.
Okay, and then next question from Syra or Kira. Why are we in such a hurry? Communication and consideration takes time. One unfortunate side effect of rushing these projects is the creation of more issues, not only for the province, but local communities, and in some instances set First Nations in opposition to one another.
I think we're looking for projects that are not taking a normal amount of time. So we want to make sure that the pathways to, having a project proposed and be constructed, it happens in a way that's not being so delayed that there's huge costs in making that project happen. It's just such an issue with cost escalations, and we have such a backlog in permits that we are really just trying to have it be, I guess, a reasonable amount of time. So we understand definitely the part about communication and understand definitely how it takes time to build relationships and consider. But I think the outcome that we're trying to get to here is that it's not years and years and years to wait for an environmental assessment or to wait for a review. We have some permits that in the provincial permits where folks have been waiting for years, and it's just not feasible to have a viable province where these critical projects are delayed for so long, because then they just become unviable. So that's really the issue that we're trying to address. And I don't think it'll be so fast. Even with all our efforts at speeding things up, it won't be too fast, I think. It still allows us time to communicate. We, just so everyone's aware too, we are building out the processes, the step-by-step processes for how we take a project forward to be designated, and we are building in information gathering that from local governments, from other interested parties, and all of that will be put forward to government when they're making that decision. So that will definitely will happen, and so you will have an opportunity to express concerns or support for a designation.
Okay, we've got one more question from Jerry. And it's, can the provincial government offset the impact of projects which are major revenue generators for the province by investing in more road maintenance.
Yes. I used to be at the Ministry of Transportation, and I know that that's a real, that providing roads is quite costly and a really critical part, obviously, of projects. So we can definitely take that in and pass that along.
Okay, there's a comment from Rob about the connectivity piece, just saying that connectivity project is active now at 95 million. So quite significant there. And then Mark.
I think that was directly to me because I didn't
Okay,
have a
great.
sense of the quantum around the project. So
Right.
that's fantastic. Thanks, Rob.
And then Mark put in a comment in here because mute is not working for him. So his follow-up was that yes, a different bill, but it has to all fit together on these large projects. Our first chance to having meaningful impact as local government is when it gets to the BCER permitting process. At this point, we don't have that option. And he said, thanks for the webinar.
Great, thank you. And yeah, we do have a strong working relationship with the BCER. And we'll be looking at how we implement as a whole. There's a large permitting, or it's called a permitting transformation initiative that's happening across most of the natural resource ministries as well as ours. We're very well connected. BCER is part of that for sure. And yeah, we're looking at more coordination. Absolutely. Well, that's incredible. We got through all the questions. Really appreciate everybody's enthusiastic participation today. These questions have been fantastic and have helped us kind of move further into the kind of detail that we do need to get into in terms of developing the regulation. It's been great working with you. It's been great working with your staff. It's been really great working with UBCM. I really appreciate the path that we're on and making, setting time aside on a regular basis to be able to work through some of these hard policy questions and to ensure that your interests are taken into account as we build up these regulations. And so we'll be back. I think we'll be having more conversations with you as we develop the further regulations. And I appreciate the UBCM helping us with the planning and coordination on setting these webinars up. So I just want to thank everybody for their time, their dedication to the topic, and your really, really great, thoughtful questions. And I hope you have a really great rest of your day.
Thank you.